And joining us now from New York, New York, Ted Sorensen, former speechwriter for President John F. Kennedy and the author of Counselor, A Life at the Edge of History. Mr. Sorensen, a great pleasure to have you on our airwaves tonight. How are you?
I'm well, and it's my pleasure to be with you.
We wanted you on tonight because we're going to spend an hour talking about speechifying by politicians tonight. And I've heard that you've written some pretty good ones over the years, so let's start with that. Is there a kind of tried, tested, and true formula that speechwriters follow in order to write a good historic speech?
I doubt it. I think that every speechwriter and every principal speaker has his own formula and his own method, and it's a process of collaboration and interaction between the two. Personally, I think that great speeches are great not because of the words picked out by the speechwriter, but because of the positions and principles picked out by the speaker.
In which case, how important is it for you as the speechwriter to know the politician you're writing for intimately, as a person, as a man or as a woman?
I think it's very important. I had the honor, the privilege of working closely with John F. Kennedy for 11 years. I not only worked on speeches, I worked on his policies, on his politics, on his programs, and he and I traveled all 50 states of the United States together during the 3 years preceding the presidential campaign in a formal sense. So I knew him very well, and frankly, I could not have done what I did had I barely known him, which is true of some hired hand professional speechwriters, I am told.
In which case, I think our viewers would like to know, when you would be working on a speech for him, how hands-on would he be in refining, fixing, editing, changing a phrase here or there, working with you, that kind of thing?
That varied from speech to speech, depending upon the situation, upon the place, upon how much time we had. When you're running for president, it's flat out 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The candidate is tired and he has to be fresh in the morning, so he goes to sleep. The speechwriter has to have a new set of speeches in the morning, so he stays up and works most of the night and delivers his work product to the candidate, usually at some point during the campaign the next day. The White House is not that rushed, but almost, because life in the White House in those days was one crisis after another. Fortunately, I was called in for the president to get my ideas on a crisis many times. I would sit in the room, I would watch other experts brief him. I would see him nodding, agreeing, asking questions. It was quite easy for me to go down to my office a few steps away and put into words the positions and the issues that I had heard discussed in the Oval Office. That's completely different from the hired hand who has an office across the street from the White House and who may not know the president that well, may not know his policy positions that well, and has no opportunity to participate in the formulation of those decisions.
I'd like to show a short clip at this point of the result of that collaboration as you've just described it. And forgive me, you may have seen this piece of tape a couple of times over the years, but frankly, I don't get tired of listening to it. Roll tape, please, Michael.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
Where'd you come up with that line?
Who said I came up with that line?
Oh, everybody knows you came up with that line. I know as a speechwriter you've got to be modest and say the president wrote every word of it, but where did you come up with that line?
That line has many claimants to fatherhood, but it actually came. It was a rewording of a thought that John F. Kennedy had uttered during the presidential campaign of 1960. Books have been written about all the people who said something similar, but I can assure you I did not copy it from anybody else, especially some of the far-out ideas that authors have speculated upon where it came. But essentially it was the result of the collaboration between JFK and me that had been going on for years and was particularly intense during that campaign for the presidency.
I think I heard you say in another interview at one point, I won't say that I wrote that line, but I certainly did type it. Is that still accurate?
No, I never said that. I didn't. I had many jobs for John F. Kennedy, but I was never his typist.
Okay. Do you think that's the best speech he ever gave?
No, I think the best speech he ever gave was the commencement address at American University in Washington on June 10, 1963, which we call the peace speech, the strategy of peace. It was the first speech by an American president to re-examine the Cold War, to re-examine our relations with the Soviet Union, and to re-examine what we meant by peace itself. Substance is what makes a speech great, not simply wording.
You know, there's lots of people who are going to disagree with you on that because nobody's quoting that speech all these years later, but they sure are quoting
You'd be
Ask
surprised. Yeah, I'm sorry to differ with you, but you would be surprised how often that particular speech is quoted. And when I tell audiences in Canada and the United States that it was Kennedy's best speech, I often see people nodding, and many of them tell me they agree. They have read that speech and quoted it over and over.
Okay, fair enough. Which president would you like to have written for that you never did write for?
Bobby Kennedy.
Because you wish he'd become president.
Yes, it was tragic that he lost his life in his campaign. I didn't write speeches, with one exception, in that campaign for him, but he would have been a great president, and whether he asked me to serve as a speechwriter or in any other capacity, I would have gladly served him.
And do you think he would have been a great speaker? Extemporaneously, he was incredible, but reading it from the text, would he have been great at that?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. He learned a lot just from watching and studying his brother.
Okay. The best speeches, I think you could make the argument, seem to have a memorable phrase in them. Ask not what your country can do for you. 1,000 points of light. 7 years ago. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall. Do you agree with that assessment?
No. Having a applause line that can be quoted is something that many speechwriters try to achieve, but it is not the measure of greatness anywhere near the substance and the principles and the values that the speech contains.
Well, in which case, fill in the blank. The greatest political speeches always what?
Greatest political speeches always convey a principled position on a major issue. John F. Kennedy said in the American University commencement speech that I mentioned, when he talked about the differences between the United States and the Soviet Union that could and should be resolved, he said, the world knows America will never start a war. This generation of Americans has had enough of war. And if the end, our differences cannot be resolved, we can at least acknowledge that we all inhabit the same small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's future, and we are all mortal.
And this is certainly not the case for President Kennedy, but can a bad speaker give an historically memorable speech?
Probably, but a good speaker has a better chance of selecting a good speechwriter and a good draft from that speechwriter. I think that if the speech is poorly worded, if it does not inspire, if it does not soar, if the wording is mangled by the speaker, it can still be a great speech if it has those great values, substance that I talked about.
Okay, in which case, in conclusion, why do you think your country has such a strong tradition of memorable political oratory?
Well, who knows? I suppose that we've had some good speakers, starting with our founding fathers, and people in politics, in public life, know that's one way to get attention, to get public attention and support for their positions, and so they strive to give great speeches, as Kennedy, Roosevelt, Wilson, Lincoln, and others did. Not every American president has been a great speaker. We know that from recent history.
The current guy's not bad.
No, the current guy happens to be very, very good, and he has a great team of speechwriters whom I know.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Sorensen, it's awfully good of you to join us on TVO tonight. Counselor, A Life at the Edge of History is your latest contribution to the bookstores of North America, and we're grateful for your time tonight. Take care.
Thank you.